All right, so it's Todd Atkins, and I'm here with the first episode of Dekes Dojo featuring Derek Galanis. And maybe for people who haven't seen, you could introduce yourself right quick and what your relation is to combat sports.
Sure. Yeah, Todd, I'm a lifelong martial artist. I wrote a book about it, Warrior of the Light. And at the same time, I had a criminal career, which probably kept me away from, self-actualizing as a fighting. But I've trained with all kinds of MMA teams, Alliance. I've trained with Scrap Pack. I've trained with Quest. So I know a lot of those guys. And, also a parallel to that, I trained long before MMA was ever a sport. I was a red belt in Tung Sudo when MMA came around. So, and I have a wrestling background. So yeah, this has been my life and I love it. And I do what I love.
Now, today we're going to talk about Jake Paul versus Tommy Fury, kind of what was going in and the aftermath. So maybe before the fight started, I wanted to know your thoughts on kind of what was kind of like the storyline going in and some things you were considering.
Yeah, so I mean, the one thing I want to say is, look, I had never watched a Jake Paul fight. I was a purist. I've been in, the fight game so long. I saw it as what it was. Like, this is a farce. They're making kind of fools of us. And then he beat Anderson Silva. And, Anderson Silva is consensus pound for pound best MMA fighter ever. I know he's, almost 50, but I'm 50 myself. So I thought to myself, how could this ever happen? Maybe this kid has something. So I watched the Tommy Fury fight and, yeah, all those delusions were removed. But, Tom, let me say this. That's what the fight game is. It preys on our emotions. Mike Tyson, Ronda Rousey, everybody thought like those people can never be beaten. They're the greatest ever. And then it just happens, and what happens in the fight game is we get caught up in our own emotion. And Jake Paul knows how to stir emotion.
Now, going in the fight when you're looking at the match, you said you had saw Paul beat Anderson Silva, but had you seen anything of Tommy Fury or no?
No, of course I hadn't. And why is that, Paul? Todd? I mean, look, it's obvious. Like in boxing, you don't watch their first few fights unless it's some rare guy like Shakur Stevenson, right? Where like he's going to be a star and they've got him on ESPN from day one, or of course Nico Walsh Ali, who they're trying to promote. So you don't see early fights of fighters typically. And why is that? Because they're working out the stuff they need to work out, right? To make them look professional by the time they're in main events and whatnot. I guess a million years ago, when ESPN was still top ranked and they threw B-level boxing because they wanted you to pay for the events, sort of like the WWF model used to be. That's all we got to see. But that's not the way it is now. We don't typically see fighters in their nascent days of development. And I think that's definitely one of the things both these fighters had going against them when we saw them fight.
Now, I watched some highlights of Fury and sorry, I watched some highlights of Tommy Fury before the fight, and he looked like he knew what he's doing. He had good hand speed, hit to the body, hit to the head. He looked like he was pretty well developed as far as his skills. So going into the fight, to me he looked like a better fighter than Paul. What did you see when you actually watched the fight? What did you take away?
Well, so going off what you said first, Todd, let's remember something. Look, I can look like the greatest boxer in the world. All you got to do is put me against a guy who has no prayer of winning, right? A designated opponent, which is how the boxing model works. So, if Tommy looked really good in the views you saw, it was probably against lesser caliber opponents. Now, what I did see in the fight, and this is just a fact, as amateurish and green as Jake Paul looked, he also showed extreme athleticism and extreme toughness, right? So he kind of brought out some of Tommy Fury's flaws. I wouldn't say Tommy Fury looked very much like a very skilled professional boxer, even though he was winning the entire fight. More so, I would say that Jake Paul looked very green. I mean, and let me give you two examples. I always noticed how Jake Paul, when he kept his hands up, looked very tight. Now, that tightness is something that goes away with familiarity of that position. Unfortunately, Jake just doesn't have a decade in boxing, which is one of the reasons you get kids in boxing so early. By the time they have, muscular development, holding their hands up like that is no big deal for them. For a guy like Jake Paul, who started later in life and has that wrestler hunched over build, that's difficult. So yeah, but the other thing that I really picked up on, and this is horrible, Jake throws his overhand right, which obviously is very powerful, but he doesn't look where it's going. And if you don't keep your eyes on your opponent, both offensively and defensively, you really limit yourself, especially against a boxer. I mean, the number one thing you learn to remove your greenness is I have to look at whatever's coming, and I have to look at whatever I'm throwing at all the time. Because if not, if I don't look at what's being thrown at me, I'm going to get hurt badly, right? It's the punches we don't see that hurt us. And, if you're winging and you're not looking at your target, you have a probably 90% less chance of hitting it. Same as baseball, Todd.
I wanted to ask you about the holding. I mean, there was a lot of it. Um, to me, it looked like Paul was initiating most of it. What did you think of all that?
Right. So why do we hold in boxing, guys? So we hold as sort of a reset, right? I don't like where I am now. This isn't going good for me. Let me hold. Now, like basketball, like do people travel? Yeah, they travel all the time. That's just one of the facts, right, of the game. And in boxing, people hold all the time, right? It's a readjustment. Now, when you're green like Paul and you're overmatched like Paul was, holding can take a life of its own, right? And it's really up to the ref to do what the ref does. That's his job, to not interfere with the fight. I don't believe either of those fighters should have points taken, by the way. Don't insert yourself in the fight. And part of the reason I think the ref took the point was the second point was because he wanted to even it out. He didn't want his voice to be who won or lost that fight. But yeah, look, holding's a part of the sport. Did you ever see Vladimir Klitschko fight that other Russian fighter in Moscow with Putin watching? He pushed down on the guy back of his head all night long, and the ref did nothing. So boxing, like basketball, is how much you're going to let me get away with. I mean, look, Michael Jordan, they let travel like 3 extra steps, right? It's Michael Jordan. He can do whatever he wants. But, look, when guys are green, the holding can look very ugly. And the ref didn't handle it in the best manner, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. I felt like he could have at least made them fight a little more. There was so much holding. It was too much.
Yeah, I mean, look, so you can even to a extent. I remember Paris Alexander. He fought. He was California state champ. He fought Oscar De La Hoya coming up, and he refed a lot of my smokers in San Francisco. And he wouldn't get too physical. He was a little guy, smaller guy, but he would say, "Guys, hands are for punching." Like don't hold. And guys, believe it or not, sort of come out of that. They realize what they're doing. Now, sometimes you got to be physical with them. And he did. I guess he didn't like the work he had to do separating them. But listen, a wrestler like Jake Paul, if it's a choice between I'm going to hold on for dear life or I'm going to get knocked out, a lot of them are going to hold on.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that. Had he not been able to hold for so much of the fight, do you think Fury would have got him out of there?
Probably. Yeah, I mean, he held for so much of it, probably. But look, we'll never know, Todd.
But what I'm saying is you feel like Fury was the better guy by how much?
So, listen, obviously, Fury's much more familiar with boxing. That having been said, Tommy Fury didn't look like a superstar himself. And why is that? Two reasons: the athletic ability of Jake Paul and the toughness of Jake Paul. So, look, I'm sure Tommy's matches before Jake Paul were much easier opponents that he could just get out of there. Now suddenly he's got a guy, and it shows you in the fight game, Todd, how far toughness and athletic ability will take you. Jake Paul's there on those two things because as a boxer, he is absolute garbage.
I mean, yeah, it's an interesting way of putting it, that a guy who's had these fights, with Woodley and I noticed he did a lot of the holding in those fights too. It's just that one of them he ended, with the big KO, but the fights themselves were hard to watch. So what I wanted to ask you is, this fight was hard to watch and he didn't necessarily look good in it. So where does he go from here?
Well, so it's funny in the promo leading up, obviously tape. They said, "Did you ever think you get here?" He said, "Yeah, I knew I'd be here. I can do anything." Blah blah blah. Right after the fight, when they interviewed him, he said, "Look, man, I never thought I'd reach this pinnacle." So, take it for what the guy did. He was a YouTube Disney star, right? He said, "I think I can box," because he knew he was athletic and tough. And he went and he did it, and he picked fights perfectly. But listen, a lot of the fight game is fighter management, right? Who do you have to fight when you have to fight it? I've talked to you about this endless, Todd. Look, Gil Melendez was not the best lightweight in the gym that we had, but the reality is Gil got the right matches at the right time. Japan here and there, to the point where everyone had consensus number one in the world for him. Tommy Fury, excuse me, Jake Paul was doing the same thing. Let me fight an MMA fighter. They don't know how bad they are at boxing. And Tyron Woodley is very bad at boxing. He's got kind of a striking style. He's got like a sugar foot stance where he doesn't have to worry about sprawling because he's a wrestler and he knows how. And he just throws that big overhand right. And that's really all he's got. Kind of ironic that that's really all Jake Paul has as well. But he was matched perfectly to the point where we started believing. And Todd, I want to say this. I started believing. I said to myself, okay, well, maybe he can beat Tommy Fury. Moron I am. Look, same thing with Ronda Rousey. I should have known. I had a teammate fight Ronda Rousey in kickboxing. Lisa Morrison was her name. And Lisa was tough as can be. And I should have known, like, no, Ronda's going to fight with a real striker now, and she's going to lose. But that's the fight game. We get emotional. We get vested. We say, no, this is what's going to happen. I was fully on the Jake Paul bandwagon. And then when I'm watching the fight, I'm like, oh, my God, this is ugly. This guy is green. See, there's some things, and Todd, a lot of people use this in jiu-jitsu, but it's true in striking. We just avoid it in striking because MMA's got so many facets, but it takes decades to become an expert at things. And when you try to put it on speed, you can get good to a certain extent. Like, was Woodley good to a certain extent? Yeah, of course he was. But he was no amateur level boxer even, And, look, Jake Paul, with the matching and the timing, has done great. But these things take a long time to learn. I know I'm still terrible at jiu-jitsu.
So, a lot of people were watching just to see if Jake Paul would lose. So what I'm saying is, because he didn't look good and he lost, do you think there's still like an audience for him in boxing?
Oh, well, so I think there's a rematch right now with Tommy Fury, right? Without a doubt about that. And then if Jake really wanted to, I don't know that he does. Because look, Todd, a fighter's life, it takes a lot of energy. Now, that having been said, he's young, and maybe that's where he wants to put his career. It's a lot healthier than partying all the time because you're a millionaire, right? So, let's hope he sticks with it and he goes for it. So if he rematches Tommy Fury and loses, well, what does he have? Well, then he can say, I want Nate Diaz. Nate Diaz can't beat me. I beat every MMA fighter I've ever fought. So, now the floodgates are open. And it's going to take a little while before Jake Paul is banned. Now, do I ever see him fighting for the WBC Cruiserweight Championship, which clearly they were foreshadowing by putting that bout in the co-main event? No. But could he keep going and fight guys like Nate Diaz and, whoever else? Of course he could.
Yeah, but how soon do you want to rematch Fury? Because like we said, outside of the holding, Fury looked like he was better than Paul. How soon would you want to do that?
Well, look, Todd, so Jake Paul has a puncher's chance against anybody, right? Hopefully he learns how to look at his opponent when he throws his punches. So, why not? And, Tommy Fury, how do I say this? Someone said this, Tim Bradley, I think, in the run-up. He said, look, the guy who's playing boxing is Tommy Fury. He's not dedicated. He's not. Now, it was a really unfair thing to say because really what it is Jake Paul gets all the promotion. They hear about, oh, he's in Puerto Rico with the best trainers. So you start to think, well, Jake Paul's really putting work in. And by the way, he may be. It just takes a really long time. But what we've seen is that Tommy Fury is a decade ahead of Jake Paul in the boxing game. He knows how to move and whatnot. But that having been said, Jake Paul gave Tommy Fury trouble. Look, my personal opinion, Todd, it was a 1 or 2 point fight. Right? Like, I don't, the spread of 3 rounds, I didn't see, especially because remember, Jake knocked him down. Excuse me. Jake knocked him down in the last round with that jab. That was a 10-8 round. And then the other 10-8 round that the ref gave him, which, Jake mentioned that. So the scores to me were a little bit surprising.
Right. But, I think, like you're saying, Tommy Fury got kind of a bad, I'd say bad deal from the announcers and stuff, because Tommy Fury looked like he trained for the fight. He looked physically great, shape wise. and he looked like he was better than Jake Paul when it came to boxing. So for Tim Bradley to say that Tommy Fury is the one's playing boxing, I think is really inaccurate because Fury looked like he put his best foot forward to get ready for the fight physically and with his skills, not Jake Paul.
No, and I agree with you 100%. I think Tim Bradley got caught in the same emotion that I've talked about on the show. Is that we get caught up in our own lives, like, oh my gosh, Mike Tyson can't be beat, and then Buster Douglas, a guy who's very chinny and been knocked out by Mike the Giant White and Tony Tucker, another victim of Tyson, knocks him out. We tend to start believing the lie in the fight game, and why? Because human beings like myths. They like giants, right? They like that, especially in Japan, right, where they really love giants. But that's what we need to keep us going in life. Suddenly everybody's talking about Jake Paul. Now, nobody can live up to these expectations. Why? Because we're all human, Todd. And the fight game, man, is all about matching. You match me right, you make me look like a killer. You match me wrong, which is actually what happened in my career, I look like, a journeyman. So yeah, it all depends, man. I mean, they could have matched if Jake Paul really wanted to, he could have been knocking out MMA fighters to the end of his career. Maybe it would have been the smarter financial choice. I don't know.
That's what I'm saying. I'm wondering if he doesn't rematch Tommy Fury and tries to look to Nate Diaz or someone like that. That might be a better line of thinking.
So let's talk about that fight. Look, Nate was a good guy when he was around the scrap pack. I never trained with him, but let me make one thing clear too. And I've been offered a couple times by some guys that really didn't have the ability, but I've never sparred with Nate Diaz. And why is that? It's because Nate Diaz is not going to spar a big guy like me. So, Jake Paul is a big guy. If they box, Jake Paul's going to knock Nate Diaz out. You can forget about like the technical precision that Nate has in comparison to Jake Paul. Jake's too big for him. He will KO Diaz. And to be honest with you, Diaz is looking a little rough later in life. But look, I get it. We all need money. So, cash out. Do it.
So you think that's the more likely fight of the two?
I think it's a smart fight for Jake Paul to make, without a doubt. And I'm undefeated against MMA stars. Watch me knock out Nate Diaz. It's definitely, look, he's got Anderson Silva, Ben Askren, and Tyrone Woodley on his resume. Nate Diaz is next. I think it's a brilliant move.
Yeah, and maybe also Darren Till, who the UFC just cut.
There's another one. Perfect.
Yeah, because he could fight in England. There'll probably be some people come out for that.
Yeah, and I think what Hearn is involved with Jake Paul. So yeah, maybe.
Now, what'd you think of the fight taking place in Saudi Arabia? I lived there for 8 years, and I was astonished that something like that happened. Because when I lived there, never in a million years would they have allowed that to happen. What did you think about the fight happening in Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, so I mean, Todd, I think it's a culmination of the things that happened in the event. Look, since the God, it would have been the '90s when I went to England for boarding school. They would try to throw fights over in the Arabian area. I remember one that was billed in Egypt for Chris Eubanks versus whoever. And that's what is that? That's foreign money, right? They want to have some Western style entertainment in their area. And they've got big bucks, right? For different reasons. Egypt obviously doesn't really have that much oil, but Saudi Arabia, well, they're the oil kingpins of the world, right? And they bought the ability to have that. I will tell you though, Todd, I was shocked at that woman DJ bouncing around ringside. I never thought that would happen in Saudi Arabia, but maybe they're sending a message to the world. That new prince who has de facto control, the one they think killed that Turkish journalist in, in I think it was in Turkey, right? Yeah.
In the
Well, he
embassy.
wasn't a Turkish.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah, maybe he's trying to say, hey, we're open for business. Hey, and look, if he doesn't, Abu Dhabi and Dubai are just gonna take that, that torch. So they got a choice, modernize now and get with the times or forget about it. And this is a great move, I think, for them. And I'm sure the prince was the one who had to green light it.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. You could maybe see like an arms race between Saudi Arabia and Abu Dhabi trying to compete for some of this combat sports audience.
You just saw the first offensive. We could expect this in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, but Saudi Arabia, no way. Well, yeah, really. Now they're in play. And this happens too, Todd. Let's talk about why this really happened. Right, we were heading to America. I think we were heading to Madison Square Garden, the mecca of boxing, blah blah blah. And the DEA put a restriction on Tommy Fury for his connections to the Kinahan cartel, that Irish mobster. Now, let me just say this, Todd. This is very, very petty. But that's how law enforcement is. They are very, very petty. The idea that Tommy actually has something to do with Kinahan or even it's just kind of ludicrous. I know that Kinahan is involved in boxing to a certain level. I know he brought Tyson Fury back after he kind of went crazy after winning the title from Klitschko and got him in shape and whatnot. But, the DEA flexing their muscle like that over something like that, it's just a little bit ridiculous and very, very petty, man. So, we lose the money. New York loses the money, or Vegas if it had landed there, and they move to Saudi Arabia. We're not going to deal with stuff like that. It's just an example of the United States. It's quote unquote, they would say morals. It's not morals. It's the DEA desperately trying to capture a guy for their promotions and everything else. But yeah, no, I thought it was a really bad move by America, but Saudi Arabia is out of it, isn't it?
Plus, it's tax free too, which is a pretty attractive tax-free money.
They don't need your money, right?
Yeah, it's tax-free zone, so they get to keep more of it. Why do you? Well, now that you mentioned Kinahan, I want to ask, why do you think they haven't been able to catch him?
Yeah, look, it is how do I say this to you? In all my time in criminality, and I was involved for quite a while, I don't really know, because I can tell you this. When my father and brother were cooperating against Tommy Gambino, they used to know exactly where Tommy Gambino was going. And then they'd lose him once in a while. Oh, okay, he entered Italy from Switzerland and he came over the mountains. We don't know where he is now. But they always had trackers on him. On my drug case, my co-defendants met with Chapo Guzman after his first escape from Alto Plano. And not only did my co-defendants meet with him, Todd, but the snitch on our case met with him. So they knew where El Chapo was the entire time. This is all a game, a cat and mouse game where they kind of play. And they say, well, it's Mexican sovereignty. We know where he is, but we can't make a move. My belief is they know where Kinahan is, right? But if Kinahan's in Saudi Arabia, they're not allowed to touch him. And by the way, Kinahan was in Saudi Arabia, if I'm not mistaken. They put him there with Tyson Fury, or maybe it was Dubai. I don't
Dubai. It
remember.
was Dubai.
But Dubai. My guess is they know exactly where he is. That's just the reality of life.
What'd you think about the girl who accused Conor McGregor on the yacht? Her car got blown up. Did you hear that? Or set on fire?
Yeah, I heard there's been some threats against her. Yeah. I mean, look, so Connor grew up in a rough, Irish neighborhood. He's got connections, right, to the Irish gangsters there. So this girl wants to make a fuss. She's from the same neighborhood, apparently, right? So nobody's going to be scared of either of them. They're just going to take revenge. And, hey, I guess maybe she shouldn't have brought the case. Who knows what happened, Todd? People get drunk and they act like fools. But it seems like a real big misstep from Connor.
Yeah, now, since we're on the subject of this fight, what do you think's next for Tommy Fury? I mean, we talked about what's next for Jake Paul. What do you think is next for Tommy Fury? Does he fight Jake Paul right away, or does he fight somebody else?
Well, for his bank account's sake, he hopes to fight Jake Paul, no doubt. The reality is he's got a lot of learning to do in boxing. I think if he fought Makuba or Badu Jack, he'd have lost last night. So he's got some time that he's got to put in to get to the level of the world-class guys. Question is, will he ever do it? I don't know. It's really hard, once you've gotten that much value and money. And by the way, I want to say something else too. All this talk about how much time Jake puts into training, it really didn't look like it. The way he can't look where he punches, the way his arms are still tight, keeping him up. And big guys start doing like Philly roll positions, like Jake was doing, and even Tommy a little bit, when they're tired and they can't keep their arms up, because that's not typical for a really big guy. So yeah, I mean, look, they both need work, Tommy and Jake. So I don't know if Tommy's going to have the wherewithal to put in the type of work he needs to become champion, even in the cruiserweight division.
Yeah, but maybe this opens the gates up for him to do some cross fights like Jake Paul was doing.
I would love that, but here's the thing: like, is anyone going to want to watch a Tommy Fury versus Nate Diaz fight? I don't think so. What makes Jake Paul the attraction is his 25 million Instagram listeners, right? People love that guy, right? He's a star in his own right. Tommy Fury's not a star. The only reason we even know Tommy Fury, well, two reasons: his older brother's Tyson Fury, and he got to fight Jake Paul.
Well, he could fight some British guys, that were in MMA too. He would draw in England. I have no doubt about that.
Well, then Hearn should definitely be looking at that. I don't know if he's managed by him or not, or what he does, but yeah, that'd be the matchup to make.
Yeah, he could fight Darren Till or, whoever. They have a lot of guys from England who had runs in the UFC and, have a name. Or he could even pick from some other European countries even. But, all that exposure that he got, I feel like that's going to open the door for him similar to Jake Paul now because he got a ton of exposure.
Yeah, man, it'd be fun if they did it at Wembley, right? Big sellout stadium. They've got that. By the way, I heard Amanda Serrano versus Katie Taylor got canceled again. Is that right?
I think I saw something like that. I don't know what the deal was. Someone put a tweet out that I think it was on BoxRec where it said Amanda Serrano was suspended indefinitely, but then they
Oh, wow.
deleted the post. It was Lukey who was on my show, Lukey Boxing. He posted it. He said, "This is interesting. It says here she's suspended indefinitely. Why? You know?"
We'll hear it. I mean, one thing about combat sports, Todd, you hear indefinite suspensions a lot. Very rarely are they actually indefinite.
Yeah, but he was saying we didn't even hear why she was suspended. So I don't know if there's truth to that post that he made or if it was he ended up deleting it, but yeah, who knows?
Maybe she's eating the same kind of meat that Canelo ate and getting some bad chemicals in her body by accident.
Now, maybe I'll just let you say a little bit about John Jones and Gane going into the fight, just a little bit, because we'll do something on this next time for people that are watching this. But maybe, he's come back Saturday. I want to know your thoughts on it.
Yeah, so I mean, look, I believe, and by the way, I've been ridiculed by my listeners on my TikTok, so it's a big fight for me. But I believe that Jones is shot. I think he lost 3 times at light heavyweight and wasn't, penalized for that because of the same emotion we talked about on the show already. I think that Jones is now off PEDs by necessity because of the testing and whatnot. And I think a move to heavyweight when you're off your PEDs is very unwise. We've had some guys do it successfully going down. Jose Aldo most notably, right? Still was sort of title contention going to bantamweight when he went off. But you saw his first fight when he went off at featherweight was Conor McGregor knocking him cold. So, as far as John Jones goes against Gane, I believe Cyril Gane with his Muay Thai is going to knock Jones out. I don't think he's capable of being at heavyweight. Now, the counter to that, and I already know it is, what about the fact that John Jones is a great wrestler? Yeah, no, I get that. And that's his only prayer, quite frankly. The problem with it is that he's not a guy like Ngannou. Ngannou was able to use his body weight and size and structure to lay on Gane and lay in Pram. I don't think Jones is going to be able to do that. Jones hasn't shown me really impressive jiu-jitsu, and my listeners maligned me for that too. Well, you got to see his underground fights, this and that. The only thing I remember about Jones in jiu-jitsu is almost getting armbarred by Vitor Belfort, who was fighting out of his weight class at that point. So yeah, I'm heavy on Gane. I think Gane's going to win this fight, and I think John Jones will be more or less retired.
Yeah, he doesn't look good physically. The pictures of him that are out, he doesn't, like you said, it looks like he is off. He doesn't look like he's in the best of shape for this fight, Jones.
Yeah, no, Todd, listen, you heard it here first. And look, I might be wiping egg off my face, but this is a train wreck waiting to happen, right? This is, in my opinion, a little bit like Nate Diaz versus Hamza. it's a fight that Jones is going to get annihilated in. Why? Just one reason, guys: the drugs. I mean, I know it's hard for people to understand, but when you've been used to fighting on PDs and suddenly you don't have them, and you're trying to go up a weight class, that is mission impossible. It's one of the reasons Jones took 3 years. Oh, we're going to do it right. We're going to do it right. There is no right way to do that. There's no way he's going to be able to compete with Cyril Gahn. He's going to get annihilated.
Well, that's something interesting to end on because I think that's a big statement. So I think that's a good thing to end on. And Derek, as always, I appreciate your time. And anyone who's checking this out, this is the first episode of Dekes Dojo. Derek, tell them where they can find like your books and stuff.
Yeah, so if you guys want to talk MMA, find me on TikTok at Derek Galanis or on my Instagram at Derek Galanis. My book on MMA is Warrior of the Light, Fighter's Journey Through the Rise of Mixed Martial Art. You can find it on Amazon. If you're more into the crime stuff and Kinahan and whatnot, find me at Derek Meyer Galanis on TikTok. I put those on my Instagram at Derek Galanis. And you can buy that book, Read and Fear the Galanis Crime Family, on Amazon.
All right, Derek, it's always great talking to you. And I'm looking forward to Saturday because I'm kind of in your boat. Last night I was talking to Miguel and Mike Hansen. They were kind of saying they think Jones is going to win. I'm not necessarily sold on that because of how he's looked his last few fights. I thought he lost both of them, Santos and Reyes, and physically he doesn't look good going into the fight. So I'm kind of with you on this.
I'll tell you something else, Todd. He also lost Gustafsson the first one.
Yeah.
So like when there's things, and by the way, fighting a heavyweight is going to be like a Gustafsson fight. He lost the Gustafsson fight because he wasn't used to fighting guys as tall as him. Well, now he's going to be fighting Titans.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. All right, Derek, it was great talking to you, and hope you have a great day. Take care.
Thank you, man.